In our first reading today, St. Paul and St. Barnabas are returning to their home base. Ang home base nila is the Christian community at Antioch in Syria after completing their first missionary journey. Magre-report sila doon sa kanilang home base. And the summary of their report is mission accomplished. And yet, if you look back at the earlier parts of the story as narrated to us by St. Luke in the Acts of the Apostles, you would note ang daming abiryang nangyari. A lot of unpleasant things had happened to them during the mission. And the most serious one had to do with Mark, the third companion, the third guy in their mission team of 3 people. How Mark had abandoned them because nagkaroon ng misunderstanding. We don't get a more detailed explanation from the reading. Basta nilayasan sila. And there were also several terrible experiences of rejection. Katunayan sa pagbasa natin ngayong gabi, pinagbabato si St. Paul. We're told that in the town of Lystra, Paul had been stoned. Kinaladkad siya out of the town and he was left for dead. But he had miraculously recovered. So madami silang hinarap na challenges. But their overall assessment of the mission was positive and successful. How is that? Well, St. Luke tells us they reported to the community all that God had done through them and how God had opened the door of faith to the Gentiles, meaning to the non-Jews. It's as if all the major problems that they had encountered while on a mission were nothing but minor issues for them in relation to what they believed that God was achieving through them. Ang ginagawa ng Panginoon sa pamamagitan nila. You know, I think there is something there that all church workers engaged in mission like ourselves should learn. Namely, that if we want to achieve our goals, we have to learn to rise above ourselves. That we constantly remind ourselves that the mission is not about us. It is not about what we do, but rather about what God is doing through us. Trabaho ito ng Diyos, and nakikitrabaho lang tayo. You know, people who can look at things from that perspective will not be easily unsettled or even overcome by anxiety, especially when things seem to be going wrong or when things are not turning out the way they had planned them. They will know how to relativize perhaps even the most painful experiences that they have been through by looking at things or looking at the events in the grand scheme of things. Merong ganyang figure of speech in English. Look at what is happening in the grand scheme of things, as they would say in English. While it is true that they had been rejected by their own fellow Jews in the synagogues, the rejection had led to the opening of new doors. And that is what St. Luke means when he says, God had opened the door of faith to the Gentiles. All they needed to do was to refocus their attention to those who were willing to listen to the message that they were proclaiming as good news. Okay, ni-reject sila, but there were also people who accepted them, and they just needed to focus on those. You see, God closes doors sometimes only to open new windows or even new pathways. Alam nyo, this seems to be the key to the peace that Jesus is promising in our gospel reading today. The peace that He gives as a gift to His disciples. The kind of peace that Jesus is offering is not one that will be free from adversities, but rather one that will learn to navigate through the adversities and challenges. The best image for this that comes to my mind is that of Jesus who fell asleep in the boat. You remember that gospel passage where Jesus fell asleep in the middle of a storm. Sa gitna ng bagyo, nakatulog siya. That's a beautiful description. Yung bang kahit may unos, kahit may problema, kahit may bagyo, payapa ka pa rin nakatutulog. Or in another passage, he's described as walking on the water, walking casually. And there is even a funny description where parang dadaanan niya yung mga alagad who were in a boat. He was going to pass them by casually on rough waters and being mistaken for a ghost. But that becomes the occasion for him to reveal himself. Be not afraid. It is I. Huwag matakot. Ako ito. And yung I am, this is me, this is I, well, suggests the divine presence. God at work and God Himself achieving His purpose even in what seems to be the worst of times.